process in two different ways, and I hope you'll talk a little bit about this. When you feel this sort of inspiration, there's a kind of devotional quality to it for all of you. For you too, it's been looking, and I suspect you had a great time playing those games too, because when you read this book and look at these questions, you'll start asking them all the time. It's really very contagious. But describe that process of looking and taking in and using, how that works for you, what kind of time that requires, just how it works.
Well, for me, I started writing Chagall poems when I was working on my thesis. And for anybody in the audience who's ever had to do a thesis, it's just this really labor-intensive thing where criticism about your work is just kind of coming at you from 3 and 4 different directions, and you're having to kind of reconcile all of that and consider it and defend it and whatever. And so the Chagall poems kind of started for me when that was happening. Very late at night, after I finished working on my thesis, I started looking at this book. This was a book that I had given my husband. And I started looking at these paintings, and these paintings to me were better than therapy, because it was very easy to inhabit those paintings and to write about the paintings and to really sort of write about something that I was not at all associated with. And so the thing about the Chagall paintings, or the thing about Chagall's work, is that I right away recognized the metaphors that existed in his paintings. And he has such a strong visual vocabulary that it was a very natural process for me to really write poetry about these paintings. I'm honestly flabbergasted that nobody has really done this before about his work, because his work, he himself, he was very much, he was friendly with poets. And his wife, Bella, he was married to Bella for 29 years. Bella was a writer, and so I think inherent in Chagall was sort of this kind of lyrical kind of sensibility, and it was just a very easy and pleasurable process for me.
So you wrote these poems over a period of time, and then you left them behind, and you've recently come back to them.
I've come back to Chagall. I've returned. I feel like sort of like the prodigal poet in a way, because yeah, I did actually. When I was writing them, probably about 3 years ago, I was writing them very quickly. And then when I knew that I had to do this program, and I had to get images from the internet and look at the book, it came back. And I'm really so delighted that it did.
Now, Megan, you have this fascination with the Surrealists, which was this great time of artists who were also writers.
Yes.
Painting and writing. So talk a little bit about how that's worked for you. Everybody has a stack of books up here, which I just love. So.
Yeah, well, I came to it, I mean, I was familiar with the Surrealists, but I was reading this anthology called Surrealist Women, and it's an international anthology, so it has women from several different countries. And I was just interested in the women who hadn't really they were kind of marginalized all throughout the Surrealist movement. And I found this little question and answer game, and it had 26 questions. And I think what we call it today is we don't call it games as much as the Surrealists did, we call them constraints. So a lot of poets write under certain constraints, and I'm a poet that writes well under constraints, and I usually write in a project mode. I have a project in mind when I write. And one thing I have trouble with is finishing projects. And so this lent itself to me because there were 26 questions, and I was done when the 26th poem was written. So yeah, all I really did for writing it was to read a lot of. I read this anthology, and then a lot of the single works from some of the women writers. A lot of them cross over. A lot of the slides that I showed, also they write as well. So it was very convenient to be able to read writing, look at the images, and then just employ some automatic writing on my end, and just allowed the poems to come up.
Now explain automatic writing.
Well, I wouldn't call what I did actually automatic writing. I kind of just was very loose in letting the poems kind of emerge, and then I went back and edited them. Automatic writing was something they did where they would actually sit around the table and kind of try to go into this trance and just put the pen in their hand and try to tap into the subconscious or some kind of underneath level and just sort of automatically write, just to get things out. And all of these games and things that they did were just ways to break down the structured rules and formats that we have for how are we going to create art. I mean, that's what they were really interested in. On the other side of all their politics and everything, one thing they were really interested in was just how to create art in new ways, and that really interested me.
And those games are still so useful for all of
Well,
us.
yeah, things like collage, I think, are just so, I mean, everyone knows what collage is. Everyone's probably done one. They're just part of our everyday life almost. That's very interesting to me that these techniques that they were thinking of is very avant-garde, and you were going to do this in art, these photo montages and things that today we just think of as, oh yeah, that's what people do. They seem kind of regular to us, but it was really breaking down these boundaries of the way things have been done.
Now you, Tricia, you've been reading and doing the exact opposite, coming up with the visual images. So tell us about that process for you, because it's lifelong now that you've been.
Well, like I said, I use many sources, and I love poetry, and just growing up in Ireland, and it's no joke, the nuns really were like maintaining our culture, and it was an oral culture because we were under the English rule for so long that the Irish were not allowed to be educated in schools, and they didn't own books, and they couldn't read or write. So it was an oral tradition, and that maintained, it was reciting poetry or singing songs. So everybody knows how to recite a poem, everybody knows how to sing a song. And I actually love finding old books with poems in them that, go back to 15th century, 16th century, poets that you can't, Google it or find it, and just leafing through them and reading. And if I get stuck, which I do a lot, I go either to a visual, but a visual doesn't usually give me as much inspiration as reading a poem. Not even a story, because the poet has this unique view of the world, and it's very concise, and the words can be really descriptive, and it just gives me inspiration for a color or a theme, and just kind of unlocks that slump I'm in.
Or shoe. You have those wonderful shoes and those
I do like shoes.
I love this.
I like painting them too.
You can tell. Now the other thing, you've done work as a set designer for theater and film. And so what is it like for you to bring those kinds of realities into 3D existence?
I think as a creative, first of all, I think everybody has creativity in them, and I still say to this day, you forgot about it when you were a child. You forgot when you were 4, how you were uninhibited and you were able to draw and write poems, and you didn't care what anybody thought. So as I've gotten older, I realized that creativity revolves around the same, notion of there has to be a concept, and you distill that concept down as far as you can. And when I got my master's in set design, my professors used to say to me, read this play and give it to me in 1 paragraph. And then it was, okay, read it again and give it to me in 1 sentence. And it was very, difficult. And then give it to me in 1 word. And so that had to describe, you had to be able to either a sentence or with a word, come up with the color, come up with the composition on the set, come up with the whole feel. So it usually boiled down to an emotion for me. Sorrow, pain, and emotions have colors, so I would start with that. And then in terms of composition, like lines can represent anger, you can have diagonals, and you can have furniture placed a certain way, a wall cutting through, and that can, that can create a sense of tension, or, there's lots of ways to interpret the words in sentences in a story or a play or a poem to correlate with the language of art, line, color, shape, and form.